All right. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today, I'm really excited actually to have a first of the series. I'm thinking of giving this platform to younger photographers. And thank you, Pranav, for volunteering also as well. You had reached out and you wanted to share a story, which I thought was really perfect for this audience actually. And I have not met him in person yet, but I'm really excited and I hopefully will be able to join him in the field one day. I'm excited to see him grow as a photographer as well. And so it'll be really interesting to hear your story. Pranav, why don't you take it ahead and share your introduction as well as your photographs.
Oh yeah, okay, for sure. Thank you so much for that intro. Yeah, so hi, I'm Pranav. I am 18 years old and I go to Palo Alto High School. And so today my presentation is going to be about owling in the Bay Area as a young wildlife photographer and just my general experiences as a birder and wildlife photographer in this region. Um, so yeah, a little bit about me. I started wildlife photography and birding around 4 years ago when I was in eighth grade. So I was around 14 or 15 at the time. It just basically started with me going to the Palo Alto Baylands with my mom's old Nikon D5300 and a 75 to 300 millimeter lens. So as you may know, the D5300 is an entry level camera. So I had my fair share of struggles using it, but I would just take pictures of waterfowl, um, hawks, and just anything I could find, anything that was moving, and it was a bird. And then I slowly started to get better and better, um, and I upgraded to my current gear, which is now a Nikon D500 with the F500 f5.6 prime. For those of you who know that lens, it's one of my favorite lenses I've ever touched or borrowed or anything. It's like super light and has great reach, especially on that crop sensor. I get up to like 750 millimeters, so I can maintain my space when I'm photographing anything. Aside from this wildlife photography and birding, I love nature. I'm a Boy Scout. I like to play basketball with my friends as long with and video games. I'm also part of my local robotics team where we spend around a semester to develop, build, program, design a robot that participates in a competition. And as I mentioned before, I go to Palo Alto Senior High School, and I'm a senior there right now. So a little overview of this presentation. I'm going to be first talking about like how I first like what really got me into wildlife photography and birding, just because you don't really see too many younger people in this field. Then um, I will be talking about how I first got interested into owling in my first owl, which was the burrowing owl, and how I found it. And after that, I will talk about my first introduction into ethics and wildlife photography ethics and ethics with owls, with the short-eared owl. And my story on that front. Moving on to the long-eared owl, a couple of months after, and then defining the most endangered owl in the U.S. I'll let you guys kind of like guess on what owl I'm talking about because I know there's a little bit of like a people argue that one owl is more endangered than the others. And then finally, we'll be ending on how to photograph them because I see people sometimes struggling with photographing owls just because low light, they move fast, and uh, we'll be ending off on questions then. So yeah. So how it all started is that COVID-19 shut everything down. All my extracurriculars uh, got shut down. School, there was no more school. I was still in middle school at the time, but the Palo Alto Baylands, Foothills Park, or Asteroid Preserve all stayed open, and I would go and just enjoy the peace and quiet that because no one was still there. People were still worried about COVID, and I would just be walking around. I got one of my friends into hiking with me, and he had his dad was pretty into birding, so he had some really high quality gear at the time. We thought, um, like I mentioned, I started off with some pretty mediocre gear, just my mom's entry level kit, and I love to take photos of raptors. That was my favorite thing to do. I still remember finding my first red-shouldered hawk at Foothills Preserve and just like spending at least an hour of it just sitting in the tree, it didn't move for at all, and I would just be photographing that. I did also enjoy going to like Shoreline Lake and the Palo Bay Land just to take pictures of like the turns, diving in, and working on, you know, advancing as a photographer. All right, and then once my freshman year of high school, I started to really get interested in um, this field. At first, it was just kind of like a hobby, but I started to travel further locations in the Bay Area. I started a club as well at my school. School was online at the time, but I really wanted to other people to, you know, see what I was doing and why I found it super interesting. And I got a few people who were pretty interested, not in just taking photos, but just observing and going out in nature and hiking with me. And that was really cool. And I started to have real goals instead of just hiking around. I wanted to try to find more and more raptors. I still had very little experience though, and it did not seem as if I knew what I was doing. Just because like I would go, and at really weird times I would start off you know, photographing at like 1 p.m. And for those of you know, like 1 p.m. is like one of the worst lights that you can photograph, right? Because the sun is super direct. But I didn't know that at the time. I was still kind of an amateur, um, you know, with lighting and where to position myself and where to really camp out to see more rare and rare bird species. And I wasn't doing the most crucial part, I believe, of this entire process to find um, owls, birds, you know, and on the wildlife side, like bobcats, foxes. I was not doing any research. I wasn't going online to learn more about behaviors for various bird species. I wasn't seeing if there were any recent sightings on eBird. I wasn't looking at distribution maps of where their general habitat is. Um, but it wasn't until my very first interest in owls was when I was at Foothills Nature Preserve, one of my favorite preserves still to this very day. And I was just photographing hawks, and I heard a great horned owl in the distance. Obviously, the picture to the right is not a great horned owl. That's a jungle owlet I found in India when I was visiting family. That was this quick snap I took. But I heard the hooting of a great horned owl in the distance. And my inexperienced me at the time kind of like overthought the whole situation and thought it was a mourning dove. But then I went home after getting like a recording of the great horned owl, and I just like played it back and compared it to like a YouTube video. At the time, I didn't know like what Merlin bird ID was or anything like that, but I used what I knew and I took like YouTube and compared the two calls, and I realized it was a great horn. So I kid you not, it was in the middle of the summer. I would go every day for like 2 hours because I had nothing better to do at the time, and I would just try to photograph, try to find the great horned owl that, and I could only hear it. I could never find it, and it was really frustrating. And it wasn't until I met someone there, and he told me that the great horns at Foothills, you had to go pretty deep in. It's pretty rare for them to come out into like that grass field and hunt or anything. But he told me where to find burrowing owls, and so that was at, I don't think they exist. They reside there anymore. But if you guys know where the kite flying area is in Shoreline Park, I'm gonna just reveal the location just because I don't think they're there anymore. Um, that's what he told me to go, and this was pretty much a shock because I remember like going when I was in elementary school, middle school. I would go there all the time with like my dad and my family just to go like fly kites, and I was like, how are there any owls here? And so I still gave it a shot. I got my friend, and we had our parents, you know, drive us over, and he just said to go pretty far deep into the area, and then we saw this really big like construction site, um, and it was just like an orange fence, and in there we just see these like squirrels kind of running around, and upon like closer examination, we see the like a singular burrowing owl just pop its head. Um, Out of the burrow that it stole, and it was just looking at us, and it was kind of crazy because it was like midday again. We didn't know what we were doing. It was like around 3 p.m. and we were shocked that an owl was wide awake at this time, and we just tried to snap as many pictures as we could. There was no other photographers there, so we had the area to ourselves. And you know, we stayed outside the fencing, try to maintain our ethics, even though we were like really tempted to, you know, cross and get better shots. We didn't. This is like a little picture of, you know, a burrowing owl for those of you who don't know. This is actually not at Shoreline Lake or the kite flying area. This is at another location. Um, However, I thought it would be kind of this is like a better shot, so I thought I would include it. And this was like what the area looked like my first time going. Um, and I still remember seeing the sign right here that just said like no kite flying. And I had seen that sign for years to grow, but I never understood why it was there. And it wasn't until I was in like eighth, ninth grade that I was able to understand. So this is the first time. This is like the main point I'm trying to get across in this presentation, and that is ethics with when you're owling. At this point, over like almost a year, it took me to really understand how to find different species and different things I wanted to see. Like there was a multitude of strategies I used. One of them was to look for sightings on various websites, apps that I installed, so like eBird, iNaturalist. At the same time, it was also to do my own research on websites to just see like the general habitat and general behaviors, and then do some experimentation by going and experimenting with different preserves by comparing them to the distribution map and like a map on Google Maps, just like kind of lining them up and seeing, oh, it could be there, so let me go try it. And you know, this worked pretty well. Eventually, we started to, you know, get to know more people in this community, and we would share our findings with others. And this was before I knew how people would share. I had no idea that you would have to have a pretty tight circle to share your findings, and you can't share them with anyone. So we would just go, my friend and I were just on like, you know, just kind of sharing whatever we saw with anyone who looked like they knew what they were doing, because we'd never seen any negative effects of doing this. We just wanted to help people, and we wanted people to help us. And then came along the short-eared owl. So in the Bay Area, there's this preserve called Coyote Hills Regional Park. I'm not sure how many people know about this, but it is a pretty popular preserve. It's around 15 minutes from where I live. You have to cross like Dunbarton. And I call this, I think it's like, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, just because I've seen so many different species of owls. And I've even seen like, you know, like osprey there before. And so it's just like some place and it's a really beautiful preserve, and I really enjoy going there. But at the same time, I've seen some pretty unethical behaviors over there. And that was the first time I saw that was when I got a tip from a friend that the short-eared owl was migrating down to and was like kind of living at this preserve. So, you know, again, had our parents drive. We didn't have our licenses at the time. Had our parents drive over. It was super crowded, just because everyone still had that like nature phase due to COVID, where they would just go to different nature preserves. So we had to like walk a mile because the entrance was closed, and since there were so many people. And when we just started going around the hills, started hiking, and we see like 24 photographers there, maybe a little less. And this was kind of a shock because we had never seen so many wildlife photographers in one spot. And when we went to ask them, they were like, at first it was kind of great because they were like, oh, be quiet. There's like a short-eared owl just like down near the water. And that's like the image I got with, at the time I was still using the D5300, but 150 to 600. And so it was again midday, because this time we did our research and we realized like they come out earlier in the day, they're more diurnal, and they have more like erratic behaviors than other owls. So we know it was all going great. Like we were photographing it, everyone was keeping distance, no one was getting too close. But then it got a little spooked because someone threw a rock at it, and I was kind of shocked. And it wasn't a photographer; it was like a relative of a photographer. So at some point I was like, oh, it's not their fault, they don't know. But I just, you know, I was 14, 15 at the time. I let it slide. I'm not going to tell, you know, an adult to not do what to do. I was kind of scared, but when it flew, it just kind of came up and then made a circle and came to more like an eye level of the preserve on like a little dead tree stump. And that's when chaos erupted. Everyone's like, packed up their tripods. I didn't have a tripod, I was shooting handheld. And they just started running towards it. I was kind of shocked. And I see this one photographer with almost like with a 600 f4, um, you know, within like 2 feet away of this owl, and I'm kind of like shocked. It's like I'm using a 300 right now, or like a much lower quality lens, and I'm keeping way further distance. People were yelling, and uh, and I actually got yelled at too for not what you think it was. I was on the side of the trail in the grass area, and so another person, not a photographer, yelled at me because I was trying to keep my distance from it, but they were mad that I trampled over grass. Again, I apologize. I was scared. My parents were there or anything. I was just me with my friend. We just apologized and we kept on photographing. And we started talking to other photographers who were kind of disappointed with these people's behaviors. And we were like, so how often does this happen? It's like, oh yeah, this is like kind of a herd mentality. It happens all the time. And you just kind of have to deal with it. It's pretty rare that anyone stands up, just because when there's a herd mentality, uh, it's pretty hard to break up the mob. And so as the day passed on, the sunset kind of like, you know, the sun started to set a little bit more. It became even more and more active, and it stopped on flying. And then it wanted to land, it wanted to hunt, but it couldn't, because every time it would land and hunt, people would just sprint towards it, and it would have to keep on flying and moving so it doesn't get so it's more comfortable. And at one point, it started to there was these like little posts. I don't know if they were old dock posts or anything, but there were these little pillars sticking out of the bay, and it just went all the way into the water, which I thought was crazy because I had never seen an owl go towards the water. It would just rest on the waterfront. And I was like, okay, at least it's safe now. Maybe might not get some food tonight, but uh, you know, at least it's safe and it'll be left alone and people will photograph it. And people start to leave. And I was going to leave too because I didn't want to be part of this anymore. When I noticed that people were starting to go down the hills and wade into the water just to get a shot. And I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. So again, we just had it. We just kind of stayed from a distance and watched people do this while talking to. We made some new friends who also disagreed with the behavior, and people were shocked. And I was just like, okay, maybe it will come another day when there's less people. So I came back the next day, but I never saw it again. I came back for like 4 days in a row. It was like winter break, I think. I don't exactly remember. And there was like a rumor that there was a second one. But I personally never spotted it, but the eBird sighting kept on going up and up and up. And this is like the time where like I started to realize that I can't really trust too many people, and it was a little sad, just because I thought this community was some a community that like was pretty close, tight knit, and I see all these birding groups on Facebook, and I was just like, oh, maybe I should just keep this with me and my 2 other friends that I go like photograph with, and not tell anyone else. And so I kind of just came up to that realization and decided to start keeping my mouth shut when I see something cool. And this was very different to when I went on a family trip to Alaska, and started photographing in a different region. um it was not, this wasn't the wildlife photography dedicated trip. It was just like, a fun trip that me and my family can went on. And I went in June. I decided to bring my camera after like, convincing my parents that it won't get stolen or anything. I'll just bring it and always keep it on me. And so we were on a little road trip on like Turnaround Pike, when I see a bald eagle just on a tree, and I was like, oh, like I told my dad, just pull over, let me take some pictures on the side of like on the shoulder. And there was another photographer there who was also photographing, and I used to start talking to her. She was like, she's on the older side, so she had a lot of experience and she had some great shots she was showing me. And I told her that 16, 17 at the time, uh, and I really love to photograph wildlife, and I'm only here for another couple of days and we have some free time. what are some places I could go? And I wasn't expecting much, but she started telling me every single spot she had. She was telling me where I could find potentially great grays or dull sheep, um, even like saw wet owls that she had seen. She gave me all these spots. Obviously, I couldn't really try them all, and it was in the wrong season. But I was really like kind of like appalled. That's the correct word, that she was able to tell me this stuff, because in in the Bay Area, I've not been able to do that, and it's kind of frowned upon telling people of endangered owl species or bird species in general, like at the locations. And so we had like a little discussion. I got her number, and we kind of like had a little call where we discussed why I couldn't do the same. And I told her that like if you ever come to the Bay Area, you're gonna probably expect the same result, that everything I'm talking about. So yeah, it was definitely very cool to get a different perspective of how photographers in a different region will behave with others. So this is when everything changed. The long-eared owl, again, same preserve, Coyote Hills Regional Park, except this time it was in November. Um, for those of you who don't know, before November of 2021, the long-eared owl wasn't spotted at Coyote Hills until like 6 years prior, I'm pretty sure. So it was pretty cool that there were like rumors of it. My friend and I were actually like the first to find this one, and we kind of kept it a secret for as long as we could. It was like Thanksgiving break. I think it was like the week before Thanksgiving break for us, and we were just going there to photograph the short-eared owls. But we'd seen the eBird sighting 6 years ago. We just, for some reason, we just seen it. We're like, you start joking around. It's kind of ironic. We were like joking, like, what if we see the long-eared? So we did our research and we realized that it came out later than the short-eared. And this was all by luck, where we would photograph the short-eareds, the burrowings, the barns, the great horns at the park, and then we would just like wait a little longer, and people would leave. All the photographers would leave, and we would see them kind of like exit, and we would just photograph the long-eared owl and like blue light, twilight. And it was definitely harder to photograph just because of the lighting conditions. But it was super cool that that was like the first time where we found a really rare owl species all by ourselves. And then stuff started to go down from there. So we were on one of the Facebook groups, and someone had posted a picture. So we realized we weren't the only ones who had seen it, and so people started to kind of trickle in into the park, and you know and it was kind of funny just because they would photograph the short-eareds with us, but then they were like, oh, so have you seen the long-eared? And we kind of had to, we knew what was going to happen just because of like the history of the park. So we kind of had to lie and say, no, we don't know where the long-eared is. And so it's pretty funny that we would see them photograph the short-eared and they would leave, and then we would just have the long-eared owl all to ourselves. And we did this for like a week straight. We had nothing to do in Thanksgiving. Like I just had like some work, and once I would finish the work in the morning, I would just go and photograph for like 2-3 hours over there with my friend. And eventually what happened is that one person kind of saw us and decided to stay, and when he stayed, he also saw the owl. And from there, he was great. That person, I still remember, was very ethical, but he did post it on a Facebook group. And from there, my friend and I decided to not go to that park anymore, just because we see pictures that on Facebook groups again of like 200 people lined up photographing this owl. And that was really crazy because we thought 24 was a lot, and now we're seeing 200, and it was really insane to see a picture of where the owl was on like the fence post, and people within 2 feet. I couldn't find a picture that someone sent me, but I was going to include that in the presentation. Fortunately, I could not find it, but it was just really shocking. And so we realized, like, we saw that the city was intervening too. We saw like I think it was like a Twitter post that my friend and I saw, where the city intervened, had to like put signs up and everything. And we were like, okay, we started a club at school. We have experience now to educate others on like what is the right thing to do. So we were like, okay, let's go. Let's still bring our cameras, but let's not photograph, and let's try to see what is really the problem here and what we can do to help. So when we went, it was after like this whole mob thing had died on, but it was still there, the owl. So we met some people. We met some great ethical photographers, amazing. And then we didn't meet some that were so ethical. What we saw was really sad. We went and we saw people actually clearing the fields, like stomping on the grass. If you guys have ever been to the preserve, it's like the preserve is filled with grass. And they were stomping on the grass and they were removing posts and repositioning posts. Onto the field so they could create like artificial posts for the owl to land on. And why this is bad is just because the reason this is bad is just because it creates more vulnerable points in the open for the owl to get like attacked by other owl species. Like the gray horn actually will attack this for territory. So this one right here, it's a little ironic because the photo I have on my screen has one of these posts, but this was just there that no one could really remove, and it was part of the park's construction. So, you know, it wasn't, I didn't move that or anything. I just wanted to put that out there. But yeah, so what we did is like my friend got extremely pissed, so he just went out in the middle of the field, kicked the post down, so he can kind of fly around and not be vulnerable. While I calmly tried to educate some other photographers, like, this is not good. You shouldn't do this. The owl's health and like, stress is more important than you getting the shot you want. And I also asked, like, this is supposed to be like nature photography, wildlife photography. Why do you want to kind of mess this up with like a human-made object? So yeah, eventually the owl left, thankfully unharmed. I heard that was the news, but again in 2022, and I guess I haven't really gone out in a while just because of college apps and everything, but it hasn't been spotted since, and I don't think it'll come down again for obviously one, the unethical practices may have scared it off. Two, it is unusual for a long-eared owl to come down to this elevation. So it's just like a variety of factors, but it is a little sad to see what I witnessed. So that was kind of like a little depressing, little on the negative side, but I will talk about my successes by finding the most endangered owl in North America. So this is, I know some people argue about this. Some people think that the great gray owl in California is a little bit more endangered just because it's like a subspecies. There's only 150 individuals left. I personally think the northern spotted owl is more endangered just because there's 2,000 individuals left in the world, or 2,000 breeding pairs. For those of you who don't know, the northern spotted owl is a subspecies, one of three of the spotted owl. So there's the Mexican spotted owl, which is down south, California spotted owl, and the northern spotted owl. And the northern spotted owl has one of the smallest distributions. And so there aren't many locations you can really find them and photograph them. I got a tip. I don't know. We just got a tip for this one by like family member, or not family member, a close friend of ours, kind of lived in the area. And so we were like, we'll give it a shot. And this one was one of the easiest owls I've ever found, and there was no one there. Still isn't really that many people there, and it was kind of just in the in its surroundings. Kind of, we kept our distance. We knew how endangered this owl is, how like threatened it is. So we kept a really good distance. I had 750 millimeters of like focal length on my camera body, so I was able to photograph it from a good distance away while it was like undisturbed. At the same time, almost a lot of the time I went, there were park rangers actually educating other like hikers, runners, and people who were walking their dogs to keep their leash on, which I thought was super cool because I'd never seen that at any other preserve, where they like had park rangers stationed there. And so I got a great report with those park rangers. I told them about like all the things I'm doing at school by starting my club, how we partnered with like the Santa Clara Wildlife Hospital to further like educate others. And it was great because one, it was kind of like a secret spot, no one knew about it, and the people who did know about it and people who did show up, they were extremely ethical. Like they would keep their distance, they would never make any calls, And we would leave after we had gotten the shots. We wouldn't really stick around and harass it anymore, because they're estimated, the species is estimated to go extinct in the next 10 to 15 years, which is really disappointing to see that I'm seeing one of the last few in the wild. So the good news is, though, I did get to see a family, like they raised a full family. I saw these two owls right here, like almost, well, they were like newborns, and I got to see them grow over like weeks, as they kept on driving up every weekend, whenever I had the time, and I just see them grow, and I was like, oh wow, okay, at least they're still reproducing, they're not harmed, and they're able to thrive and everything. So it was great to see that not all wildlife photography is bad, in the Bay Area, and that there are good moments where people follow the rules and trust each other a little bit more. So yeah. So it's been around, I guess, like 4 years. Been a little inactive for a little bit, but I've had time to self-reflect from all the experiences I've had in the Bay Area when photographing owls and birds. And the number one thing is the owl's health. Stress is much more important than the actual shot itself. Um, Remember, we're just here to document. We're just here to showcase and create art, but create art or educate others. But if there's anything that is affecting them negatively, then you should never do it. And like I said, I've had both positive and negative experiences, and I believe I will continue to do so, as I grow as a photographer, and start traveling more, not only in California but in other regions in South America. I hope to go Asia, Africa. I believe that I will be there and still stand up for different species I see. And I've also seen the effects that people have had on these creatures, that I photographed. Like, for example, I did go to Yosemite this past summer, and while I did not see any of the great gray owls, I did hear one, but I didn't see them. I had seen what the Yosemite Park Rangers were doing, to make sure that the owls would remain safe. Like, they had parts of meadows fenced off. And they would even ask my friend and I, like, when we went together, like, what are you doing here so early? And we were honest. We told them that we were foot searching, and they educated us on ways we could photograph more ethically. And they told us, like, make sure you have silent shutter on, make sure you're keeping X amount of distance. And this led me to some more takeaways. It's like, be careful where you post the shots. Like, I actually did not post my long-eared owl shots until like a couple months after, on Instagram, a couple months after the owl was spotted. And the main reason was, like, when you post a shot, even if you don't put the location, the way Instagram works is it'll start promoting local wildlife photographers around you, and people can guess where that is just based on the surroundings, right? Like, I bet a lot of you guys could guess where this barn owl is, just because, like, it's in Coyote Hills. I don't know. I have so many images from that place, but, like, you could definitely understand why this could be the background of the fields over there, and easily find where to photograph the owl. Again, avoid unethical practices such as baiting, calling, or even altering the environment, which I was I didn't even know that people did that just to get shots. I thought that was just like, a human development thing, that people would cut down things or trees or whatever to, build something. And, like, lastly, the one that I feel like is really, really important to hit home on is distance. Keeping a safe distance, not for your safety only. For example, if you're photographing, I know this is a bird presentation, but if you are photographing a bear or bobcat, mountain lion, whatever it is, right? You want to keep your safe distance so you don't get hurt, but also you don't want to hurt them, and you don't want to put more stress on them because they have enough to deal with by hunting every day. So, to summarize, if you guys want to screenshot this, I definitely have taken a picture of this, and I will show it to other people in the future. These are the four main ethics unethical behaviors I've seen, and not only by photographers but by bystanders as well. Animal calling. Personally, I have never done this and never will do it. I have seen professionals do this, especially when I went to Alaska, and I asked them about this, like, why are you calling? I thought this was very unethical, and they were like, it is unethical, especially for civilians to do it. But since they were park rangers, they were trying to find data inventory on bald eagles, and so that's where they were playing it back. And the second they would get a response actually from the bald eagle, they would immediately shut it off. My suggestion is still, if you are, a regular civilian wildlife photographer, not a professional, I believe that you should stay silent and just like, it'll be like, just take, it's kind of like just like luck. You gotta deal with whatever you have, and hopefully you'll find it. Sometimes you will find it, sometimes you won't. Next, baiting. You've seen obviously bystanders be throwing like seeds for like ducks and stuff. That's a form of baiting, right? But you also see wildlife photographers also getting frozen rats and then throwing it up for a hawk to come towards the camera and get the head-on shot. So like this long-eared owl, right? This was not baited at all. I got really lucky just because I knew its flight pattern and where it liked to fly, and so I positioned myself a fair distance away and let it come towards me before it like flew in a different direction. And so what I'm trying to say is that you can achieve these shots of the head-on shot even while you're not using bait. Altering the environment is also something you should never do. Like, remember, when you are adding additions to the environment for these species, it can do more harm than good. Yes, you might get your shot, right? But it can create more vulnerable areas where the species that you're photographing can get attacked by others, because remember, most things have predators or things that it fights for territory, especially the long-eared owl, like I explained earlier. And then distance. Remember, the greatest place to look for distance guidelines is National Park Service. They have great guidelines for how far you should be when you're photographing a bear or a moose. And then there's plenty of government sanctioned websites. Like I was looking at Fish and Wildlife on how far you should be from endangered species in general, even the ones that won't harm you. Yeah, and also use common sense, right? Like if you see that the species the subject that you're photographing is under distress, it might be just best to leave and come back another day when there are either less people or the environment's better, or whatever it is. So yeah. And so yeah, the goal of this presentation is not to offend others at all. It's not to say that one person is better than another. Obviously, I am still 18. I know that there are people in this call who are they're much older than me and have much more experience, and I'm excited to learn from all of you guys. But what I have learned is that it is important to see to show others that when you know something, you should tell them. And just because someone has insane equipment like a Sony A1 with a 600 f4 doesn't mean that they will always be right. And you should remain calm when you're educating them, and also take feedback if you're wrong, right? Like I have been wrong in certain cases, like about either knowing what an animal is going to do, or how a certain animal like functions, right? Like what their behavior is. And people correct me, and I have to accept that I was wrong. It's okay, because I heard a story about someone, again, Coyote Hills, it keeps on coming up, but someone supposedly was a stroke patient or like an ex-stroke patient, and they were getting yelled at. And remember, that could have ended really badly for their health as well. It's not only always about the animal, it's about the community. And another reason I think that it's such a big problem in just the Bay Area and not like other regions like Alaska is just because the Bay Area is an extremely competitive place. I see it in high school all the time. I see like my friends, my peers, my classmates all taking extremely hard courses, just trying to reach to the top. And I can see this within startups too. People are, always trying to be the best. And I think that type of culture has carried on into the wildlife photography setting as well, where people are always just trying to get the best shot, trying to find the most species, kind of like building a resume, sort of. But I hope by educating you guys on this type of issue, it'll make the community tighter and stronger. So that is the part, that is the ethics part that is complete. I do want to go over some photography techniques, just to talk about like what I've seen is the best way to photograph owls, especially. Um, and so yeah, I believe that the two hardest things I photographed in California, on the bird front, it is going to be owls. On the mammal front is for me bobcats, just because lighting can be tough with them and with their eyes especially. And so for owls, it's always important to go completely manual when you're shooting in low light. So I know some people will use auto ISO. I think that it's best if you go and switch over to manual ISO and just use that instead, because owls can when they fly, they can contrast against the sky, and they can contrast against the foreground and the background of like leaves and grass very easily. And so by using manual ISO, you don't get the blown out effect that you would get with auto ISO. My next thing is, don't be afraid to bump up the ISO and lower your shutter speed. I've seen, like when I've been photographing, I've seen people with tripods, and like sunset, it's like almost like 45 minutes after sunset, I'm still shooting handheld with shutter speeds as low of like 1/250, 1/100 of a bird in flight, like a barn owl. Like I think this shot right here was taken 30 minutes after sunset, 45 minutes after sunset. This was like 1/250. ISO was like 5,000. And I remember there was someone who was next to me who was photographing with a tripod, and their shutter speed was 1/2000. I was like, oh, that's a little high, don't you think? And I was looking at the shots, and they were sharp. They were sharper than mine for sure. That was also because he was using much higher quality gear, but it was extremely, extremely noisy. He was shooting at 20,000 ISO. But again, you just have to really experiment and feel like you are more capable than you think. And the aperture will depend on your situation. I personally think that you should shoot wide open, but I will give you an example of why that failed for me. So this is an extreme example of, I know this is a bird presentation, but I thought this was a good example to give you guys of like why you think you're more capable than you actually are. This, for context, this is a leopard in India that I was photographing in Rajaji National Park. I was like a little side trip that we did when we were visiting family. And I think it was almost pitch black at this point. There was a small little light from a shed, I think from this right corner right here, and it was barely illuminating the leopard. As you can tell, it's not like a super high quality shot, but it was taken at 1/10 seconds shutter speed. This was handheld, wide open aperture, and like I think 8,000 ISO. And you can see like I got a really good amount of detail still. Yes, the ears kind of like he flicked his ears a little bit, and so you can see a little motion blur there. You can also see a little motion blur when I shook the camera a little bit because handheld. A better example of this was the shot I was showing earlier, where it's like the long-eared owl. This was I think 1/250 at 5.6, and then ISO 6,000. Yeah. What I did mess up on, however, is right here. You can see that because I had a wide open aperture, the wings were a little blurry. Whoops, I don't know how that came out. So yeah, the wings were blurry, and in the future, I mean, at some point you can't prevent this just because it's so dark. But if I had to go back and if I had to go back to this moment and change it up, what I would have done is I would have still bumped up my ISO a little higher, and just kind of pray that it won't be too noisy. But at the same time, I want to get like the wings fully in focused. Yeah. Oh, I think someone's writing something. Oh, right. Yeah. I completely forgot to mention that. Yeah, I use a variety of denoise apps as well. It's thank you whoever that was that annotated. I should have probably put that in the presentation, but I use Topaz denoise as well as DxO, just depending on the situation. I'll use one or the other. And that does a great job of removing some of the noise and increasing contrast and sharpness in your images. Highly recommend for those of you who photograph in low light situations to buy that. They have great Christmas sales. That's when I got mine. And so, yeah, I put almost all my images that are in low light that have really high ISOs you know, and even in Photoshop, not Photoshop, Lightroom, they have some great denoise features as well. So yeah, I think I'm at 45 minutes, so I'm gonna wrap this up in a little bit. A little bit more on photography techniques. Now, some of you might be thinking, like, at some point it might be too dark to photograph. While this is true in some cases, I personally think it's never too dark to photograph. I've photographed in pitch black some owls. It's like the Western screech owl. I've photographed and it was completely dark. And the way I was able to do this is by taking, I do astrophotography as kind of like a little side hobby as well. And I took some of the skills of like the long exposure aspects of that and combined it with the wildlife, my wildlife skills. And what I did is I used a tripod and some photo stacking to get this image right here of a Western screech owl. So the Western screech owl, this was I think an hour and a half after sunset, so completely dark. And I think this is 2 or 3 images stacked on each other. But this was a 4-second exposure, 3 of them. And the owl stayed completely still. I was so lucky this happened for 6 minutes straight. And I was able to take, a good solid 10, 15 shots, completely sharp, and then stack them on top of each other using a stacking app. And this way I got very low noise and a pretty sharp image for like lighting conditions that were so difficult to work with. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, it is definitely possible to photograph even in the worst conditions. And this is how you would do it. Yes, you can't do this for, like, let's say a barn owl that's flying around, right? You can't do the long exposure thing. But I'm saying that, don't always give up on hope. Don't lose hope. You can definitely get the shot. This one's a little controversial. I personally think that when photographing owls, especially owls that are in flight, obviously not this because you need a tripod for this, you should be using handheld photography. Now, some people may disagree with me on this one, but I think it is important just because owls are super fast, and especially like the short-eared owl, if you guys have ever seen that, they change direction super quick, and it can be hard to pan, at least with my tripod, to get the right shot. Secondly, if you do need a tripod, like, you're in nature, try to like see if you have anything that you can use to rest your camera on, like whether it's a tree bench or a post. I've used that plenty of times. Even like my friend's shoulder, I'll just keep my camera on and I get pretty stabilized shots. But you have more flexible positioning where you can, like, go down on the ground and you can use the ground as your tripod or a resting spot for the camera. Also, a really important feature is a lot of newer lenses have vibration reduction and auto stabilization that people take advantage of. And because of this feature, it makes it a lot easier to like get the shakiness out of your hands and not into the camera. Real quickly, my focus settings, these are the settings I use when I'm photographing birds in flight or in even stationary positions. So I always have it on group autofocus. I know some people may be shooting on mirrorless, but so I would recommend using eye tracking because I've used my friend Z9 and he had eye tracking on it, worked beautifully for birds in flight. But I have a D500, so not super technologically advanced. So I use group autofocus, which is like 4 focus points. And then I use back button focusing. I do not use the shutter focusing. And this is just because I want to be able to, do burst shots and not be worried about like my focus going out of focus just because of a tree comes into the viewfinder. Then I also have used this little thing. It's like a joystick for those of you guys who have like a higher end either a D500 or a higher end DSLR from Nikon, you can like kind of move the focus points. And if I press down on it, it'll give me dynamic area focus, which gives me like around 25 points. And that's just used for like bigger animals, like mammals, or like a bigger, like a blue heron. I would use that for sure. That's just kind of resting there. Yeah. But something that's kind of interesting is I actually use the front of my camera too. I use this button right here for my single point autofocus. And I do this just so I can get like the eyes really sharp. And so I used it obviously for this one. I just focused on the eyes by pressing it and locking the focus onto the owl. And it's extremely useful to have so many buttons to quickly switch between your different focus groups. Another thing that I do is I use this button right here. I didn't put an arrow or diagram for this one, but to actually view my images. So for those of you who shoot on mirrorless, great benefit of that is you get to shoot what you see, right? You get your live camera feed. But on DSLR, you can't always do that. You kind of have to look at your images and see what you get after. And if you don't know, you can see the viewfinder button to like see the view button is on the left side. And if you have a big lens, you have to take your hand off, press it. So what I do is I just use my pinky right here to get the shot, get to see what shot I did, and then I don't have to remove my hands at all, which is quite beneficial for me. All right, again, kind of like a summary, start at a higher ISO always, and if you have time, then make your way down and while adjusting your other settings. And the reason for this, in my opinion, is just because this ensures like a sharp shot. However, it will be noisy, but at least you have the shot. And yes, you can use your denoise to remove some of the noise, but it might not be the greatest quality still in terms of grain. But if you start making your way down the settings, eventually you will be able to achieve maybe a slightly blurrier shot, but you're going to have just a wide variety to choose from. Again, for owls especially, have your back to the sun. You don't want any backlit shots unless you're going for a silhouette art type of effect. And again, when you're photographing owls, you want to be a couple hours, maybe at least 1 or 2 before sunset, unless you really know how the owl functions. You want to be like 1 or 2 hours. You want to arrive at 1 or 2 hours earlier and have just a clear plan of like, oh, I think it's going to come out from here, fly here, so I'm going to start here and then move my way over there. Just pretty simple instructions. This is the most important, which is do your research and understand the ecosystem behavior of that particular owl species. I kid you not, the amount of times that this type of research has helped me find more owl species and bird species in general is kind of insane. The more you know about how they behave and they function, the more you will understand on how to photograph them and how to find them. So, all right, a little about my future plans. I hope to, graduate high school and get and college with a degree in data science or computer engineering. I hope to minor in animal sciences. And while I'm in college, I hope to educate others and stand up for endangered species and when I see unethical behaviors. A little side project I have these 2 passions of robotics engineering and animal science, and I want to combine my 2 special skills to make more efficient camera traps. For those of you who don't know, camera traps go on sides of trails to gather data and inventory on species. They use IR sensors and you can get a lot of false positives. But I'm currently developing one that is entirely machine learning based that will identify on the spot and organize it for you, which I think will be extremely useful for researchers and their time and experience. And they can be focused on other stuff rather than searching through thousands of images that are false positives. And lastly, I hope to keep on improving my photography game and hopefully win the Audubon competition one day.
Wow.
All right, so yeah, thank you so much. It was a great speaking to everyone here, and thank you so much for letting me speak.
Excellent, Pranav. I mean, that was so good.
So, anyone have any questions for me?
Fantastic. Actually, I'd allow people to unmute themselves and ask. I'm just really curious. You said Coyote Hills, and I'm really curious about the audience here too. I know exactly the example you're citing in terms of the long-eared owl and the behavior of people. We were amongst also the first few people who actually called the police that day
Oh
from
wow.
because the city had to come in, and people
I
are
was
just
not there for
jumping
that
over the
part.
marsh. Yeah, they were just getting into the marsh and then climbing over, and then just absolute chasing the owl, and it was so unnerving for a lot of us, and it was very sad. I stopped going after that day. We just couldn't believe it that we have people who do this for a photograph. And yeah, it's one of my favorite parks in the world, actually. It's just absolutely stunning place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you. Thanks for sharing the story too. And then I'm really curious on, behavioral notices by others, because there's times where you tell and then, I got frustrated, so I stopped telling people. But then a friend of mine taught me this great secret. And I wish I was actually as zen like he was as a photographer. And what he basically said is, look, just try explaining to people that if you do this, neither you nor anybody else is actually going to get a shot. It's not good for the owl's health or the bird's health. And try explaining it that way, right? So
Yeah.
it kind of works, but it really doesn't at times, right?
Yeah.
I'm just curious if other people have opinion or, some feedback. Because as a community, this is something that we all need to be very aware of. We do bird photography for a lot of reasons, including satisfaction, being outside in nature, being peaceful. And then you come across this, right? So I'm very, very happy you caught this very early on and learning the right way. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
hope I helped others to, also educate them and see if they wanted
Absolutely.
to talk about it
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, please use this. I really like the enthusiasm you have, not just photographing them, finding them, talking to people. It's exciting to show these photographs to, people, and say why you are excited, but the ethics behind it is so critical. Really a big fan. Um, Questions or comments from other one? Did you enjoy this? What do you have suggestions for all of us as a community? What do you think? It's a very quiet group today.
Hello. I was part of that mob at the Coyote Hills, photographing the long-eared owl too. But I was also shocked to see how close some people would get. The owl would land maybe like 10, 15 feet off the side of the road, and people would run up to it and try to get within about 15 feet of it, even though they have these big telephoto lenses. And we were kind of hoping that the ranger would come along and enforce some kind of distance rule and actually start finding people, because so many people were just crowding it so badly. I'm not surprised it didn't come back after that either.
Yeah.
And people were also like just standing on the road and blocking the way of cars and just not being very aware. So yeah, it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a cell phone shot of a person laying on the ground on the street, and a car is just whizzing by him. It's really so sad, right? You have no, I mean, this is an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah.
When there's that many people, there's always going to be a few that go too far, unfortunately.
Call them out, post their pictures, shame them.
Yeah.
That's what I do when people do that sort of shit diving. Step up.
Yeah, it's an important thing, right? I think calling them out is one way. We tried talking to them, but obviously that didn't help.
Yeah. I personally do think though, like, calling them out is the most important thing. It's something that I do not only with photographers, but with bystanders as well. But I have seen though, like, people who get mad, like my friend who, kicked down the post. You know, if you don't remain calm in these types of situations, you can end up looking at like the bad guy. So it's really important to, be mature.
You
Stay calm.
practice. You
Yes,
practice.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
then it gets easy. The first time you do it in real time, it's difficult. I do this on dive boats all the time when people are harassing turtles or octopodes. You say something, and then after you do it live the first time, and you're on a dive boat in these instances, you're in the middle of the ocean. Sometimes you're like a mile from shore. Sometimes you're 50 miles from shore. You call them out, and you're stuck on that boat together. So you learn to do it well. So what you do is you practice. And it's the same. I don't bird with groups. I just don't. I don't like people enough. You bird you do the same thing. You practice. And then every time it gets easier and easier and easier because you have the pattern and you know how to stay the course.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Actually, it's something that, I'm also learning. At some point, Pranav, you also said this, right? It's a mob behavior. So you just don't know how they are going to react. And
if it helps, you write a script for yourself, or you record yourself doing it, right? And you practice. But if you really care, you develop that tool so that you can tell people, no, what you're doing is bad and this is why. But you don't sound like a complete and utter bitch.
Yep. That's fair. That's fair.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, we all care enough, right? I think that's the thing. And I think educating is one part. And this is what I really enjoy about this group. And I learned all my photography skills and ethics from this group, right? You go off, shooting with people in this group, and they teach you along the way, hey, this is acceptable behavior, this is not. And you're right, I've seen people who call birds during mating season. It's absolutely disgusting, just so that they get one picture, right? And I had a really good mentor here, and he had just, he's been here for a very long time, and he said, hey, this is completely unacceptable. Just so that you get one picture, you're disturbing a bird and making, its behavior change. And so things like that you learn in the field, and as soon as you get that practice and you learn, I'm hoping that we actually help, teach other people as well. So please keep up the good work, Pranav. Really appreciate this.
Yeah, and thank you guys so much for attending and letting me speak today. It was really great.
Yeah, thank you. And what I will do is, this is recording now. This will be converted into a YouTube video, and we'll post it as well on our website. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, folks. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
I'll see you in January.
All right. Thank you.
Good night.